Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. What we offer today is journalism at its finest. Insightful candor in writing about New York's architectural environment. Those are the words of the Municipal Art Society in awarding their distinguished Brendan Gill Prize to our guest today, Michael Kimmelman. Michael also writes passionately about housing and art and much more, and you'll meet him next. I'm happy to welcome to the program Michael Kimmelman, and for many reasons, not least of which was a riveting piece you wrote recently about public housing, two exceptional success stories, both private developers at the core of them, one in Queens, one in East Harlem. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it in general. Let's talk about both of those projects.
I thought they were both interesting projects, really because they're public and private collaborations in a sense. So the Arborn project in the Rockaways, this had been one of these sites that it used to be called Ocean Village. It was a project built in the 70s, housing project out there. Mitchell-Lama project, so it was middle class and working class people who were there. And, it had fallen on hard times. When it opened, it was considered state-of-the-art housing, a mix of high-rise and townhouses. And then it continued to deteriorate over the years, and when Sandy hit, it was really socked. So a lot of the tenants left.
That was the last straw.
Yeah, that was the last straw. And it was about a third empty. There was a lot of crime, and the place was really a mess. Just after that, like a couple of weeks after, a developer called L&M, one of the big developers in the city that does affordable housing, acquired the site and poured through loans. I mean, I don't think it was out of its own pocket, but in any case, poured about $60 million into renovating this place. What's interesting about that, I think, is that, we have this idea that there are these housing projects in the city. They're all over the place, many of them from the mid-century, and that they're just unsalvageable. They're just blighted places that, we can't really fix. Basically, what L&M did was they said, look, we're going to re-landscape it, we're going to build a seawall, but we're also going to put new facades on the buildings to make them more waterproof, make them more attractive. They did new lobbies, kitchens, and bathrooms, and voila.
And the place, the pictures anyway, it's
looks
a show.
Great.
It's a
it
show
looks
place.
Great. Look, I talked to people who lived there for 30, 40 years, and they were just overwhelmed. There's also better security and other things to ensure that, it's not the same
How
kind of
fearful were the residents, even though things were at the bottom, at the nadir? Here comes a private developer, okay, all these great plans, but rents are going to go up and we're going to be forced out.
Right. So, I think this is very key, that L&M went in there and talked to the residents and spent a lot of time negotiating with the residents and promising the existing residents that their rents would not change. So this is very important, that when you have this kind of situation where someone's going to go in, whether it's public or private, you need to talk to the existing residents, make them feel that this is going to benefit them and that they're not going to be displaced by change. Because one of the big problems throughout public housing in New York City, affordable housing in general, is that even when it's very bad, people are fearful that it's just going to get worse and that there are speculators out there who want to take this land. This is NYCHA's big problem. They have a lot of land, but they also have residents who are very resistant to using that land for other purposes, even though some of those purposes would help them.
So we have a success story in public housing with a public-private development in Queens called Arborn. We have another one you wrote about, East Harlem, called the East Harlem Learning and Development Center?
Living Center,
Living
yeah,
Center.
Exactly.
And it was a parking lot.
Right. Now, that actually is an example of, that is a Bloomberg-era initiative, and it does use a parking lot. It wasn't for market rate housing. It was for this thing. So this is actually another example of what could be done with these sites, and this one works. So this was a site on 2nd Avenue in East Harlem. It had been a kind of, ratty asphalt parking lot with an old cement, a little park, kind of a park. the plan was to take that site, take that NYCHA site, and redevelop it with affordable housing, 100% affordable. And with that as well, a new school, a new charter school,
Right.
called the Harlem Dream School, serving residents in that neighborhood, about 500 of them. And then adding a park. And this was done by the Harlem RBI, which runs the charter school and is a local organization, and Jonathan Rose, one of these other affordable housing developers. You know, it took a long time. There were a lot of negotiations, very difficult to do with NYCHA and with the unions and all this kind of thing. But in the end, I think what's there is kind of remarkable.
You wrote that both of these, you said it's proof that affordable housing can still be done right in New York. What are we doing wrong when there is such a great need for affordable housing, and yet it seems to run into walls all over the place? What are we doing wrong?
I mean, look, you know, first of all, there's a question of affordable to whom. So we have this whole question of who are we building this housing for? You know, there's a lot of pressure on middle class families as well to find housing that's affordable in many parts of the city. But I think, you know, the federal government and the city really got out of creating new housing themselves long ago. The NYCHA dates back to the 30s when the federal government financed and built, you know, tens of thousands of very wonderful apartments.
In case you don't know, NYCHA meaning the New York City Housing Authority.
Exactly. And so what we now do is try to eke out affordability from private development, to sort of get a piece of every private development to finance affordable housing. That means we have to incentivize developers who are doing market rate development. And, you know, in some ways this works, and in some ways it's highly problematic because it encourages often development that we don't want. And it's really about the public getting a piece of private benefits, not really doing it themselves.
Yeah, I guess you're speaking to the question that was on my mind is, are L&M and Rose and their partners exceptional, or are these things that could be replicated if we had better leadership, laws, rules?
I mean, look, I think L&M and Rose both make money doing this. This is a going business, and they come out of this pretty well too.
Sure.
It's possible to make money and you know, do good things. Yeah, I mean, I think they and other developers of that sort can do a lot more of this. The problem is, it really comes down to financing. In order to make this pencil out, you need really a lot of help, public financial help. And the federal government is the biggest source of that, and its funds are increasingly limited. So we're trying to tap in, we as a city are trying to tap in as best we can into those federal funds to do more projects like this.
And what do you think of, I mean, Mayor de Blasio has staked a claim on public housing as one of the main initiatives of his administration. What do you think of his plans and what he's been able to do?
I mean, he's staked a claim on affordable housing, and he's given himself a target figure in 10 years of 200,000 either new or preserved. Public housing, that NYCHA housing we're talking about, he has some ideas for, but hasn't really thought a lot about, I don't think, or thought enough about. So that plan in East Harlem, I think, is a model that should be replicated. I haven't heard enough from City Hall about that. But I mean, I think my big concern about this administration is not that they're focused on housing, which is a big issue, but that the city, as a healthy, living organism, isn't just about housing. People don't only need housing. What made that Harlem project so interesting was it recognized that in addition to housing, you need schools, you need parks. I think that kind of integrated thinking about neighborhoods and community, that I'd like to hear more of from this administration. When you're so focused on just housing and that's what you want to get because you promised a number, you can lose sight of the fact that actually what communities need is much more diverse range of things. And I think the resistance to some of the housing proposals from the city come from the fact that the city doesn't really have good plans for how the city should develop, for what neighborhoods should look like.
The big idea isn't there.
Yeah, if you had promises that you were going to get the kind of that there was City Hall was listening to you, knew what your community wanted, that you would get the new school, you'd get more transit, you'd get that new park or whatever, then if there was also, as part of that package, a request to build more housing, communities might be more amenable. But that takes planning, and frankly, the city hasn't been doing city planning for a long time.
Before we leave the subject of housing and go back quickly to that Bloomberg administration initiative that I alluded to, if I remember it correctly, it was, okay, we'll take some of the public housing property, we'll put up market rate, and with the money we'll help public housing. And there was such an outcry.
Right.
And you wrote about it that it seemed, I'm reading into what you wrote, that you thought it was a good idea, just very, very badly explained.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's not just, it's one thing you could do on some properties. What happened there was that late in the Bloomberg administration, they were looking at NYCHA housing at $17 billion in the hole in terms of capital repairs.
Right.
Where could they find some money? So you do have some sites which could be developed for market rate housing. But you know, these tenants are very skeptical of any kind of change and of all the other kinds of threats that new housing could bring, gentrification and so forth. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of thrown out there without all of the negotiations and conversations and so forth that would have made that possibly one thing to do among others. But, you know, it's not to say that that can't still be put on the table, as I said, in limited places, in limited ways.
As you rightly point out, there are so many big ideas that need addressing in this city. One of them is transportation. And we've seen recently in the mayor's State of the City address a proposal for a streetcar between Queens and Brooklyn, sort of along the waterfront, a corridor that is not well served. People trying to get from Brooklyn to the Queens, you know, have to come through Manhattan, most of them.
Right.
What do you think of that? And I don't know, I don't want to make you into a political prognosticator, but are we ever going to see it?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm very self-interested in this because it's an idea I proposed 2 years ago, which
right.
I think went through other iterations and has now come out in the State of the City. So I'm pretty biased. I'm biased for it, by the way, in the sense that I think it reflects growth patterns in the city. And so it does what the New York City subway did 100 years ago, anticipate where growth would be, not just respond to demand
right.
at the moment. And I think that's a good and healthy thing. And I also think it's good because it connects tens of thousands of people who are in affordable in public housing, about 45,000 of them, who've been really cut off from transit.
Yeah, there's a lot of that housing in that
corridor. Right. I had proposed it from Red Hook up through Astoria, and they've extended it now to Sunset Parks, and that's good because you have more jobs down there as well. You know, whether this happens, of course, like anything in New York, is hard to predict, but I would say that what was done here, I know certainly after I wrote, was a lot of study about the financial feasibility of this and how it could get paid for through property values that would be raised as a result of this. So essentially to pay for itself in the way that the extension of the number 7 train was financed.
Right.
And I think that is very promising because it means that this project is not done in lieu of other serious demands. This project is done because it finances itself. If you don't do this project, there is no money to capitalize on to do something else.
Well, and it would seem, given that the developers along the way, many of them are in support of it for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But they obviously believe it's going to increase the value of their property. And,
Sure.
And
It will.
if that can be tapped for
Right.
the kind of money to build the thing, that's what we're...
Yes, and for lots of new housing. We were talking about affordable housing. There's a lot more housing that can go along there. And, listen, I mean, I bow to no one in my concern for, having decent, equitable housing and an equitable city. But just because something also benefits developers doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. I
No,
mean,
not at all.
This, I think, could be a win-win.
And Michael, I think we should make the point that you were telling me before we sat down. This project is completely the city, right?
Yeah.
The governor, the state, the legislature can't get in the way on this.
Yeah.
Well, this is, well, maybe they can, but
This is New York. Anything can
yeah.
happen. Yeah. One of the reasons I liked the idea in the beginning and was thinking of it was also that the streets are controlled by the mayor, so you don't have to negotiate with the state. It doesn't necessarily involve the MTA, though the MTA is on board, as it happens with this. And of course, this should be coordinated ultimately with the MTA fares and so forth. But yes, it's something the mayor can just do on his own. So we're not necessarily going to run into the problems that other projects have lately run into.
Well, I have no pressing needs to go between Queens and Brooklyn, but
Right.
I'd really like to see this, and I'd like to see it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Since we're on transportation, let's talk about the governor back in January.
Yeah.
Talked about fixing, quote unquote, Penn Station, and his fix is the old story: move it across the street to the post office building, Farley Building, and. You didn't care for that, at least what he proposed.
Right. We all can agree that this is something that's urgent, and it's urgent for lots of reasons. It's not just about, that it should be a nicer place to go through, or that there's development on the west side and we should have a station to match the development on the west side. It's also not a very safe place, and so it really needs to be made safer. And finally, the major number one priority, I think, infrastructurally, is the need for new tunnels under the Hudson, passenger rail tunnels.
Right.
And those will almost certainly come into a new Penn South. That is tracks that will, platforms that will be just south of the existing station. So we're going to have to reconfigure Penn Station in some way. Then the question is how. And, my argument has always been that Madison Square Garden, an aging arena, sits on top of this station. And if we could move the garden, it would liberate us to do whatever we wanted, essentially, with the station itself. And then the question is, where could the garden move that would make the owners of the garden and the users of the garden, the patrons who come see the Rangers and the Knicks, everybody else, happy?
And presto, you think,
well,
move the garden to...
There was an old
Farley.
idea to move the garden to the back of Farley, and the Dolans, who own Madison Square Garden, entertained that idea for a while. It fell apart when Governor Spitzer fell apart, and then they poured money into renovating the existing garden. But, I mean, it's still there as a site, and it makes sense to me to explore it again and not to move Amtrak, which is a tiny portion of the ridership and traffic that goes through Penn Station, to create a ticket hall when, by the way, people don't even buy tickets that way anymore.
Right.
So you're going to make everybody cross 8th Avenue to go to a more or less useless ticket hall and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to do that, and then have them come back probably to cross 7th. This is not really thoughtful. It's aesthetic. It looks like it's going to make a nicer station, but I don't think it will.
What do you reckon would be the Dolan's reaction? I mean, they just spent a whole bunch of money renovating.
Right. So,
the
I mean, obviously, the Dolans have not called me up and said, that's a great idea. I've been saying this for a while. I still haven't gotten that call. But I think this is my argument to them, and I think they and their shareholders must want to think about this at least, which is that, look, the garden is still an aging place. You've poured money into this, but we're not talking about this happening tomorrow. We're talking about something that's going to happen in, let's say, 10 years. So by that point, the garden is going to be 60 or 70 years old, whatever it is. And actually, this is going to be more or less a free arena because
Air rights.
it could be financed by the developers of the Penn Station site through air rights and other means. So if I were the Dolans or their shareholders, I was told you're going to stay on the same transit hub. Your patrons are going to come straight up through the same subway stations and train station straight into the arena. They're just going to go into the Farley building, not into the existing garden.
Right.
You're going to get this for free. It's going to be the new state-of-the-art arena. It's going to be part of this incredible McKim-Mead white building, but it's not going to be hemmed in by, because you're going to have that whole building to work with. I mean, I don't really see why you wouldn't want to do that. I mean, that seems to me a pretty compelling idea, rather than trying to hold on to this piece of property that doesn't really, you can't really fix it up much more, and it's going to continue to age. So there you are, Dolans. That's my That's my argument.
Well, Jimmy, are you listening? A success, a city success story. At least I'll say, go out on a limb, with a small limb. If you drive down the West Side Highway, as they call it, West Street, way down south there in Tribeca area, there's a couple of new buildings on the waterfront, and it turns out it's a city sanitation garage and a salt place, where
Salt
the place
shed.
where they, salt shed.
Right.
And it's beautiful, and it works.
Yeah.
You wrote about this, and
Yeah.
tell me,
Yeah.
is this like you got to hit your head and say, "Wow, this actually happened"?
No, I think it's, look, I think it's great, and it shows us lots of different things. First of all, it shows us that public buildings, this is the Department of Sanitation, public buildings can be beautifully done and great amenities in a neighborhood. So just because the sanitation department says, we're coming to your neighborhood and we're going to build a garage, doesn't mean
Screaming.
you have to come up on
The
barricades.
Tribecans, if they can be called that.
So a slew
Scream.
of them, from Lou Reed and James Gandolfini and a lot of other very visible people came out there and were against this. Look, I understand the fear that your neighborhood is going to be turned into a garbage dump, but that wasn't at all what was being proposed. The result of this was not just the usual NIMBY story, but a process that ultimately produced, I think, a pretty remarkable work of art, which is the salt shed. And I think now neighbors there are actually, if not openly, then secretly fond of this, because it's really quite an amazing thing. First of all, the garage itself, which is the big building, is sleek and nice looking, and I think fits in the neighborhood. And if not that, they could have gotten a giant 40-story building. So in a certain sense, the neighborhood has been saved by that.
Right, and a 40-story. This is right on the waterfront.
Exactly.
So
block their views and everything else.
This is only what, 5 stories?
Right, consistent with the existing warehouses that were there. And then the salt shed across the street, that was a plan to create something that would really be distinguished, not just a necessity, but a real amenity in the neighborhood. It doesn't quite look like a salt crystal, but it's a really expressionistically shaped building. Not big, but big enough to house tons and tons of salt inside. And from the West Side Highway, it looks super cool. And I can imagine it actually in the summer being used as a place to have performances. And I think the sanitation department even likes the idea that people are fond of it and it could become part of the neighborhood.
You brought up NIMBY, and we see it all over the city. We see it everywhere, in other cities. We have the Upper East Side folks who are not so thrilled about the sanitation transfer station
Right.
on 96th Street or whatever it is,
Right.
92nd Street. We have, you wrote about the plans by the museum, the Natural History Museum to
Right.
expand, and how people are screaming. And a critic of that kind of attitude, NIMBY, wrote that, if we'd had that attitude back in the 30s, we wouldn't have gotten the Empire State Building.
Right.
What do you think of that point? I mean, I'm not sure which side it...
Yeah, no, it's it's a very interesting question. I'm a native New Yorker too, and I grew up in Greenwich Village. Much of the village is changing in ways that make me upset. But so I understand this feeling that we want to preserve what it is that we love and know. In the old days, the Empire State Building replaced the old Waldorf Astoria. The Lenox Library was replaced by the Frick. I think there's often a feeling that, and the old Vanderbilt mansion was replaced by Bergdorf Goodman's, which is now up for landmark. Had we had the landmark laws 50 years earlier, probably none of those buildings would now exist. So there was a feeling, I think, before that change was going to bring something better. And over the last half century or so, we've come to be skeptics about that, and that has fed NIMBYism and a sense that the city is out of control, it's getting too tall, too big, whatever. New York is a dynamic city which has always lived on the basis of change. So, I think freezing it is obviously in no one's interest. The question is balancing genuine concerns for what remains a healthy neighborhood, a healthy place, with crass commercial interests as well. These are the competing issues, I think, that you can. There's no clear answer. That's the truth. I think the answers always come out of specific situations and open conversations with both, not just the NIMBYs, but all interested parties. That process of talking through what should happen is the way a city works, basically.
Give us your sour take on the super talls, as we call them, the buildings that have come. The one
right.
in Midtown Park
Street.
Avenue, 57th Street.
Right. I'll tell you my take. I think some of them will turn out to be quite attractive. The first one that went up, 157, is, I think, just one of the most god-awful, ugly buildings in the city. And if people want to pay $100 million to store their money there, that's their business. I think the big issues are, what does this mean at the street level? And there is, of course, something deeply offensive about walking around a city where super rich people are looking down on you. There is something about the economy it reflects that is offensive about the buildings. But listen, the truth is there are not so many of them. They're not really going to proliferate, I don't think, because the truth is that they've probably already reached their maximum number. Yeah. And I don't know that there's money left for developers to do this. So I think people were fearful that this was going to become a plague everywhere and a great shadow would be cast all across Central Park West. I'm not quite sure that's going to happen. I think definitely the people who built that building and are occupying it should be paying more in taxes to get that property. But the buildings themselves, some of them might actually turn out to be attractive.
It's a very interesting conversation, and there's so much more to explore, and which means you have an open invitation to come back.
Very kind. My pleasure. I was happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you. We'll see you next week.